God will lead you. In the darkest moments of life, when the shadow of the end seems to engulf all hope, this simple yet powerful call resonates like a beacon. Follow God. It is not merely an invitation, but a promise of eternal guidance, a path to everlasting light amidst the storms of the soul. Follow God, for God is the source of strength that enables us to overcome the harshest trials, transforming fear into steadfast inner resilience. Every step taken in following God brings profound peace, fortifying the spirit and mind so that we no longer wander lost amid life's uncertainties. When facing imminent death, humanity often descends into an unprecedented state of inner turmoil. It is a moment when everything seems to halt, when the body weakens, health deteriorates, and the awareness of human mortality becomes clearer than ever. Imagine a person lying on a hospital bed, surrounded by the beeping of machines, as a doctor delivers the news that time is running short. At that moment, fear is not just about physical pain, but also about spiritual loneliness and profound questions. What is the meaning of this life? Where will I go after closing my eyes? Such thoughts can crush the will, sending the mind spiraling into a cycle of confusion. Yet, in those very moments, the call to follow God becomes more urgent than ever. Following God is not an escape from reality, but a confrontation with it through a supernatural strength. God is the one who guides us through the darkest valleys, turning the fear of death into an opportunity to discover eternal life. When we choose to follow God, our spirit is uplifted, no longer bound by anxiety about the end, but focused on the journey ahead, a journey filled with light and hope. Consider terminally ill cancer patients, whom medicine can no longer help. Yet when they turn to God, they find an inner strength that allows them to smile in their final days. This is because following God provides psychological stability, helping us realize that death is merely a door to a better reality, where all pain dissolves. Moreover, facing death without God can lead to complete collapse. But when we follow God, everything changes. God does not leave us alone. God walks beside us, holding our hand through every step. The path of God is a radiant path where fear is replaced by peace. Picture an old soldier on the battlefield, knowing death could come at any moment. Yet because they have chosen to follow God, they find the strength to carry on, not out of fear of death, but because they know their life is guided by a higher power. This steadfast spirit does not come from human strength, but from complete trust in God. Only by following God can we view death not as an end, but as the beginning of a greater journey. We see clearly that facing death is a profound challenge, but it is also an opportunity to begin following God. Each remaining day becomes more precious, not because we cling to it, but because we are walking the path God has laid out. God's guidance transforms fear into strength, stabilizing and clarifying our psyche. Follow God, for only that path brings true radiance amidst the shadow of the end. After confronting death, discouragement and despair often crash in like raging waves, sweeping away any remaining hope. Discouragement may begin with small setbacks, losing a job, a broken relationship, or declining health. But when death looms, it becomes an immense burden. You feel that all efforts are futile, that life is filled only with failure and suffering. Despair is even deeper, a sense of being utterly lost, like wandering in a dark forest with no way out. Negative thoughts repeat endlessly. Why must I endure this? Is there anything worth living for? The psyche becomes fragile, brittle, leading to prolonged isolation and despondency. Yet, in those very moments, following God becomes the key to breaking this negative cycle. God is not an abstract concept. God is a tangible guide, bringing light to a soul submerged in darkness. When we choose to follow God, discouragement gradually fades, replaced by a renewed vitality. Consider a failed entrepreneur who has lost all wealth and stands on the brink of self-destruction. Yet upon turning to God, they find a new direction. God's path is a radiant path, where every failure becomes a lesson, and despair is replaced by steadfast hope. Our spirit becomes resilient because we know God is leading, ensuring we do not lose our way. Moreover, despair often leads us to doubt everything, but following God brings clarity. God illuminates the dark corners of the mind, helping us see that life has a greater purpose. Only by following God does the psyche truly flourish, no longer swayed by negative emotions. For example, a mother who loses her child and sinks into despair. Yet when she begins to follow God, she finds the strength to carry on, not by forgetting the pain, but by transforming it into a motivation to help others. That is the power of God's path. It is radiant and leads us out of darkness. We recognize that discouragement and despair are inevitable challenges, but they are temporary if we follow God. That path brings radiance, fortifying the spirit to face all difficulties. When discouragement and despair reach their peak, turning to God becomes the only remaining choice, and it is the decision that changes everything. Turning to God is not the final act of desperation, but the first step toward revival. It is the moment we realize human strength is limited, and only the Almighty can lead us out of the abyss. Imagine someone at rock bottom with nothing left to cling to, whispering their first prayer, "God, please guide me." In that moment, a glimmer of light begins to shine. From here, following God becomes a radiant path, where every step is guided by God. God is the divine compass, ensuring we do not wander aimlessly. When we turn to God, our psyche is healed, and our spirit becomes stronger than ever. Only by following God do we find the true horizon where all anxieties dissolve. For instance, a once skeptical scientist facing illness turns to God and discovers a life newly oriented, filled with meaning. God's path is a radiant path, bringing inner peace. Follow God to ensure the spirit always flourishes. God's guidance acts as a spiritual navigation system, helping us traverse the complexities of life without losing our way. In the context of facing death, this guidance becomes more vivid than ever, transforming fear of the end into peaceful acceptance. Reflect on how ambition often thrusts humanity into a vortex of anxiety. We race against time, amassing wealth. But when death approaches, it all becomes meaningless. Following God is the way to reduce such ambition, redirecting focus from temporary goals to eternal values. Modern psychology might call this a cognitive shift, where divine guidance restructures the mind, reducing cortisol, the stress hormone, and boosting serotonin, the hormone of peace. But more profoundly, it is because God's path is a radiant path, where every step is illuminated by infinite wisdom, ensuring our spirit remains steadfast through all trials. We see that being led by God is not merely following abstract advice, but integrating that guidance into every facet of life. For example, in daily decisions, instead of being driven by personal ambition, we learn to ask, does this align with God's path? This reduces ambition by fostering humility, recognizing that the true horizon lies not in worldly success, but in harmony with God's will. Psychologically, ambition often stems from fear of scarcity or lack of recognition, leading to inner instability. But when we follow God, we find true fulfillment, as God leads us to living springs where the soul is nourished without the need for competition. This path is the horizon for reducing ambition, teaching us that true value lies in adhering to divine guidance, providing spiritual resilience that the world cannot offer. Moreover, God's guidance also helps us perceive death not as a threat, but as part of a greater journey. When ambition diminishes, we no longer cling to this life in desperation, but instead embrace the end with a peaceful mindset. This fortifies the psyche, transforming discouragement into motivation to continue walking on the radiant path. Only by following God can we truly experience that horizon, where all ambitions dissolve, giving way to true freedom. This is a process of liberation from the cycle of desires, enabling the spirit to reach a state of balance, where divine guidance becomes the only necessary source of strength. God's path, when revealed through guidance, is the true horizon that everyone should aspire to, especially in times of facing death, discouragement, and despair. This is not a vague route, but a clear itinerary built on the foundation of divine wisdom, helping to reduce ambition and bring steadfastness to the spirit. Analyzing this idea, we see that ambition is often the source of psychological instability, as it creates unrealistic expectations, leading to continuous disappointment. But the path God opens is a radiant path, where ambition is replaced by complete trust in God, shifting our psyche from a state of chaos to profound stability. This passage emphasizes that the path of following God is the only true path, the horizon leading to eternal life, helping to reduce all worldly ambitions by focusing on divine truth. This scripture clarifies that following God is not merely a choice, but the core truth, helping our psyche remain steadfast by providing an unchanging foundation. Ambition often leads us astray, but God's horizon brings clarity, transforming discouragement into strength to continue. This radiant path is where all despair dissolves, because we know we are being guided by the one who is the truth. Moreover, expanding on the idea of reducing ambition, we see that God's path does not eliminate all desires, but directs them according to God's will, enabling the spirit to achieve harmony. In times of facing death, this brings peace, as we are no longer bound by personal ambition, but free to walk under God's light. Only by following God does that horizon open, bringing long-term psychological well-being. The light from God, when received through the journey of following God, is not merely an abstract symbol, but a real force, illuminating the darkest corners of the human mind. Analyzing deeply this aspect, we can see that this light functions as a transformative psychological mechanism, helping to reduce ambition by reshaping perceptions of life's value. In the context of facing imminent death, the light from God becomes the key factor in analyzing the shift from internal chaos to sustainable harmony. Ambition, often driven by survival instincts and the desire for control, creates a stressful loop where humanity always feels deficient. But when following God, this light breaks that loop by providing a superior frame of reference, where the true horizon is no longer limited by temporary goals, but extends to eternity. Consider how the light from God influences psychological structure. From a cognitive perspective, ambition often leads to bias in information processing, where humanity prioritizes signals confirming material success while ignoring warning signs of spiritual exhaustion. The light from God, through continuous guidance, encourages a process of cognitive restructuring, helping us reevaluate ambition as an illusion that can lead to despair. God's radiant path becomes the horizon for reducing ambition, as it brings clarity that true value lies in adhering to God's will, thereby fortifying the spirit by minimizing internal conflicts. This analysis shows that only when following God does the psyche reach a state of balance where discouragement has no place to dwell, because every thought is illuminated by divine wisdom. The light from God also functions as an internal energy source, helping humanity cope with death by transforming fear into positive acceptance. Ambition often exacerbates that fear, as it ties personal value to tangible achievements, leading to a sense of failure when death threatens to take everything away. But on God's path, this light analyzes and disintegrates ambition into unnecessary elements, replacing it with a horizon where divine guidance brings steadfastness. This not only reduces ambition, but also enhances psychological resilience, helping us view despair as a temporary phase to be overcome through trust in God. The light from God is the decisive factor, as it not only illuminates, but also transforms, making the spirit flourish by eliminating the shadows created by ambition. Moreover, from a spiritual, philosophical perspective, this light represents the perfection of truth, where following God becomes the only path to achieve inner wholeness. This analysis emphasizes that worldly ambition often leads to psychological fragmentation, with conflicts between desires and reality. But God's horizon, radiant and unchanging, helps converge every aspect of the soul, reducing ambition by directing it toward a higher purpose. Only in this light do we truly experience spiritual steadfastness, as every deep analysis leads to the conclusion that God is the necessary divine guide for long-term well-being. Advice from God, expressed through Scripture and internal guidance, is the core element in the journey of following God, especially when deeply analyzing how it helps reduce ambition and fortify the spirit. Analyzing this idea, we see that this advice is not rigid directives, but a dynamic guidance system, adapting to each personal circumstance. In times of discouragement and despair, advice from God becomes an analytical tool to disintegrate negative thoughts, helping us realize that ambition is often the source of instability. God's radiant path opens the horizon, where this advice becomes a compass, guiding us away from the traps of worldly desires, thereby bringing psychological steadfastness unmatched by anything else. Consider how advice from God influences the decision-making process. Ambition often drives impulsive choices, leading to long-term consequences like stress and regret. But when following God, this advice encourages a contemplative approach, where every decision is weighed under the light of divine truth. This reduces ambition by prioritizing humility and trust, transforming the psyche from anxiety to peace. Deep analysis shows that only on this path does the spirit truly flourish, as advice from God provides an unchanging frame of reference, helping us face death without being dominated by the fear of losing temporary achievements. Advice from God also functions as a spiritual psychological therapy, helping to analyze and heal internal wounds caused by despair. Ambition often conceals these wounds by creating illusions of control, but God's advice exposes and transforms them, leading to the true horizon where divine guidance becomes the only source of strength. This fortifies the spirit by minimizing dependence on external factors, bringing true internal autonomy. This analysis affirms that following God is a radiant path, as this advice not only guides, but also uplifts, helping the psyche reach the pinnacle of steadfastness. Moreover, from a philosophical analytical perspective, advice from God represents infinite wisdom, where reducing ambition becomes a natural step toward perfection. The path God opens is the horizon for us to explore true value, far from desires that lead to discouragement. Only by adhering to this advice do we experience full psychological well-being, as it eliminates all disruptive elements and replaces them with divine harmony. Divine guidance from God, when discovered through the journey of following God, represents a profound internal transformative mechanism, helping to analyze and restructure the entire human psychological system. Deeply analyzing this aspect, we recognize that this guidance is not merely superficial direction, but a process penetrating the deep layers of consciousness, where ambition often hides as a controlling force. Ambition, from the perspective of religious psychological analysis, often stems from a basic lack of security, leading humanity to compensate by pursuing external goals. But God's radiant path opens the horizon where divine guidance analyzes and resolves those deficiencies, replacing them with a solid foundation based on unconditional trust. This reduces ambition, not by forced abandonment, but by transforming it into motivation toward higher values, thereby bringing spiritual steadfastness that is not shaken by events like imminent death. Consider the divine guidance as a dynamic model, where every step on God's path creates positive feedback within the psychological system. Discouragement and despair often generate negative loops, with ambition acting as a catalyst that amplifies instability by exaggerating unrealistic expectations. The guidance from God breaks that loop by providing a stable guiding vector, helping the psyche shift from a state of chaos to structured harmony. This analysis shows that the true horizon lies in accepting that guidance as a core principle, reducing ambition by redefining success not as possession, but as companionship with God's will. Only when following God does this internal transformative mechanism operate fully, bringing long-term psychological well-being, where facing death becomes an opportunity to affirm immortal spiritual strength. The divine guidance also influences the unconscious aspect, where ambition often forms from early life experiences, leading to prolonged insecurity. God's path, with its radiance, illuminates those unconscious regions, helping to analyze and integrate them into a unified whole. This reduces ambition by encouraging natural release, not through personal effort, but through the power of the guidance. Deep analysis affirms that this is the horizon for humanity to achieve true freedom, as it removes the burden of desires, replacing it with steadfast inner peace. In the context of discouragement, that guidance becomes an analytical tool to transform negative energy into positive resources, helping the spirit not only remain steadfast, but also develop exceptionally. Moreover, from a metaphysical, analytical perspective, the divine guidance represents the connection between the finite and the infinite, where worldly ambition is analyzed as a limiting illusion. Following God opens an endless horizon, reducing ambition by expanding psychological vision beyond temporary constraints. Only on this path do we experience comprehensive spiritual well-being, as that guidance not only directs but also upholds, turning every challenge into a step toward perfection. The true horizon that God's path opens is a concept that needs deep analysis to understand its role in reducing ambition and strengthening the psyche, especially when facing discouragement, despair, and death. Analyzing this idea, we see that this horizon is not a geographical or abstract destination, but a comprehensive perceptual framework where psychological reorientation occurs systematically. Ambition often distorts the horizon by narrowing vision to short-term goals, leading to instability when those goals are threatened by death. But following God reorients that horizon, analyzing and expanding it into a boundless space, where ambition is reduced through prioritizing divine guidance. This brings spiritual steadfastness, as the psyche is no longer bound by fragile expectations, but anchored in unchanging truth. Consider the true horizon as an epistemological model, where the radiance of God's path functions as an adjusting lens. Discouragement often creates illusions of a dark horizon, with ambition intensifying that illusion by promising false solutions. The reorientation from God analyzes those illusions, replacing them with a clear vision, helping to reduce ambition and transform despair into grounded hope. This analysis emphasizes that only when following God does that horizon become reality, bringing psychological well-being by balancing reason and emotion, turning facing death into part of a meaningful journey. The true horizon also relates to the aspect of spiritual development, where ambition is analyzed as an obstacle to inner growth. God's path, with continuous guidance, helps overcome that obstacle by expanding the horizon to new dimensions, reducing ambition through encouraging contentment with what God grants. This strengthens the spirit by minimizing internal conflicts, bringing a sustainable state of peace. Deep analysis shows that this is the key mechanism for coping with despair, as the true horizon provides a clear direction, helping the psyche avoid getting lost and always aim toward perfection. The true horizon represents existence with purpose, where following God becomes the answer to profound questions about life's meaning. Ambition often obscures that horizon by focusing on temporary existence, but the reorientation from God analyzes and clarifies, reducing ambition to make way for true freedom. Only on this radiant path do we achieve comprehensive spiritual steadfastness, as that horizon is not only a destination, but also a daily source of strength. Trust in God, nurtured through the journey of following God, forms a sustainable psychological foundation, helping to analyze and gradually eliminate ambitious elements that cause internal disruption. Analyzing this aspect shows that this trust functions as a protective mechanism where humanity gradually learns to surrender all worries to the divine guide. Ambition often creates instability by promoting excessive self-reliance, leading to exhaustion when facing discouragement or death. But God's radiant path encourages trust as a core principle, analyzing ambition as an unnecessary burden, thereby transforming the psyche into a state of true rest. The true horizon that opens here is the realization that only through trust does the spirit achieve steadfastness, no longer shaken by external changes. Trust in God influences how humanity processes emotions, especially during phases of despair. Ambition often amplifies negative emotions by linking them to personal failure, but trust analyzes and separates them, replacing with a balanced perspective based on divine guidance. This reduces ambition through prioritizing acceptance of God's will, bringing psychological well-being by reducing the intensity of stress. God's path becomes the horizon where trust builds an internal defense system, helping to face death not as a threat, but as part of a greater plan. This analysis affirms that following God is the only way for trust to become a source of strength, strengthening the spirit to an unbreakable level. Trust also analyzes old behavioral patterns, where ambition often leads to relentless pursuit. God's radiant path changes that pattern by encouraging pausing and listening, reducing ambition to make way for guidance from God. The psyche thereby becomes more flexible, capable of adapting to discouragement without falling into despair. The true horizon here is the recognition that trust is not passive, but an active act of relying on the Almighty, bringing sustainable spiritual steadfastness. Only when following God does this process complete, turning every challenge into an opportunity to reinforce the internal foundation. Trust in God also relates to long-term cognitive development, where ambition is viewed as a temporary illusion. The divine guidance analyzes and eliminates that illusion, helping the psyche achieve profound clarity. God's path opens the horizon where trust becomes the key to peace, reducing ambition to focus on eternal values. This strengthens the spirit by creating a positive loop, where discouragement is transformed into stronger motivation for trust. Inner peace, achieved through following God, is the result of a profound analysis of destabilizing factors, especially ambition and related negative emotions. Analyzing this aspect shows that this peace is not a transient state, but a solidly built psychological structure under divine guidance. Ambition often destroys peace by creating continuous conflict between desires and reality, leading to prolonged discouragement. But God's radiant path analyzes that conflict, replacing it with harmony based on divine truth, reducing ambition to open the horizon where peace becomes the daily foundation. The spirit is thereby strengthened, capable of facing despair without being swept away, as inner peace brings superior steadfastness. Inner peace influences how humanity copes with death, where ambition often exacerbates fear by tying life's value to unachieved accomplishments. The guidance from God analyzes that fear, transforming it into peaceful acceptance, reducing ambition through focus on God's presence. God's path becomes the true horizon, bringing psychological well-being by balancing emotions, helping discouragement gradually dissolve. This analysis emphasizes that only when following God does inner peace become reality, fortifying the spirit to overcome all challenges without diminishment. Inner peace also analyzes the layers of consciousness, where ambition lurks as a latent force causing disruption. God's radiant path illuminates those layers, helping to gradually eliminate ambition and replace it with inner rest. The psyche becomes more stable, with the ability to maintain peace even in despair. The true horizon here is the realization that peace does not come from personal effort, but from trust in the guiding one, bringing sustainable spiritual steadfastness. This analysis affirms that following God is the only path to achieve true peace, turning all instability into a foundation for development. Inner peace also relates to the integration between reason and emotion, where ambition often creates division. The divine guidance analyzes and converges that division, reducing ambition to open a harmonious horizon. The spirit is fortified through this process, helping to face death with profound, peaceful mindset. Only on God's path does psychological well-being complete, as peace becomes an endless source of strength. Spiritual harmony also relates to adaptation to change, where ambition often creates rigidity. The divine guidance analyzes that rigidity, reducing ambition to open a flexible horizon. The spirit is fortified through this process, helping to face death with profound, harmonious mindset. Only on God's path does psychological well-being complete, as harmony becomes an endless source of strength. Inner freedom influences how humanity handles responsibility, where ambition often turns responsibility into an unbearable burden. The guidance from God analyzes that burden, replacing it with freedom based on God's will, reducing ambition through focus on authentic guidance. God's path becomes the true horizon, bringing psychological well-being by liberating emotions, helping despair to be transformed into motivation for freedom. This analysis emphasizes that only when following God does inner freedom become a source of life, fortifying the spirit to overcome all constraints without weakening.